a copy of this for me, and
Well, you have to edit all the rambling I've been doing too.
no, I just want the raw footage. I don't want to edit it. I just want to have it in its purest form. You're not rambling.
I've never been the object of a film before. Well, I was on the street a couple of weeks ago, but
They filmed you?
yeah.
Who?
Some people came up. And
Just letting a few
yeah,
seconds
don't
roll.
lose that. Don't lose the point though, because that's very central.
Man, you really lost
Is this on
that.
right now?
It is.
Oh, this is on?
Yeah, it is. It's on.
Oh,
Go ahead,
okay.
go.
All right, so in between what I was saying, John added a point, and I think he should make that point and add it to what's going on.
Well, it seems that everything that you're saying is basically a recurrent theme. It's all very simple. It's either everything is either yes or no. It's either on or off. It's either light or darkness. Even something like a computer, the basic building blocks of artificial intelligence, it's based on a binary system of either it's an on switch or an off switch. It's 0 or it's 1. And it seems that everything that you're saying is just that same recurring theme.
But really, could the universe
Be that
be
simple?
binary? No. I mean, I'm sure it could be so simple, even simpler. But a binary system is a man-made system.
Well, no, the binary system was a man-discovered system. It was the mind of the universe that revealed the binary system to man.
Okay, but let's say that the human mind, which is obviously very limited, stores information in an electrochemical format as opposed to an electromagnetic tape format.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that because there are other my assumption, I don't know what to call it. Okay, I don't really know anything, but maybe these subtler bodies of man which we cannot perceive, which the yogis claim exist,
Mm-hmm.
and these higher dimensions that exist above the fourth, also play a part in the storage of information, memories, emotions, smells, tastes, love affairs in our mind. And so to me, that's not a 0-1 kind of thing. It's way beyond anything I can grasp right now.
Well, for sure. We don't want to reduce everything to a mechanistic explanation. We don't want to all of a sudden imagine that it's as simple as each of us being made up of the parts of a computer, and that really we're, cyber robots but at times, as we're approaching an understanding of the sublime, you cannot fail to pass through this sense that maybe this is the way it's working. Of course, when you find out that in the attempt to create artificial intelligence, you find out that man is a long way off from creating the emotional content that exists within the human person. So there is what transcends the mechanistic view. The emotional content, the love that man is capable of, the compassion, the depth of feeling. Yes, all of these things transcend the mechanistic explanation. Nevertheless, you don't want to rule out the fact that God is not using these principles as means of transferring the sum of their consciousness into the sum of ours. See, in other words, if it's the soul that is being created within, and this soul is not mechanistic, this soul is purely spiritual, and it operates on an entire other frame of reference, it's nevertheless the soul is functioning inside of a physical body that does seem to operate on mechanistic principles. So the body is receiving impulses and signals from without. Something divine is already within, assimilating the information. and turning it according to the mind of the possessor, which is God, into into the character that each of us are becoming, into the personality, into the soul that is being created within the framework of each individual. Many in our time are not being created in the image of perfection at this lifetime. Everyone will. But there are those who are coming to perfection are doing so as a result of the association of their soul, which is infinite, with the physical frame in which we exist, which is finite, which is mechanistic, which is operating on electromagnetic and electrochemical principles. So when we find out that the pathway between this universe and the parallel universe that exists within the field of Minkowski's equation, so we say, well, how does the soul penetrate? How does it get across? And the easiest way that we can visualize how the mind can get across to that place is just simply use the example that we have in our time. If I can, with a flick of a button, transfer all the information on this hard drive to your computer, beep, well, just how simple would it be for the mind of the universe to transfer or translate the content of your soul and my soul across the vortex of this universe through the dimensions into the parallel universe. Well, I mean, if it's as simple as this for us, it must be as natural and as simple for God to accomplish that.
Are these two parallel universes that you just referred to the same two universes that are flickering on and off?
Yes. Just as this universe is flicking off, when it does, the other universe is flicking on. You see, because there's no vacuum. And so one of the reasons that that gravity as a force will not fit into the framework of the other forces is that because gravity literally is the attraction in the universe for these two universes for each other. And if you look on the Tree of Life, you see that each of the Sephiroth on the Tree of Life, there are 10 of them, they equal the planets and the sun, with Tiferet, the earth, in the center. And you see these lines, these 22 lines of force connecting the Sephiroth on the Tree of Life. Well, what you're seeing there also, when you understand the Tree of Life in terms of its historical dimensions, so then those lines of force represent time. And so when we look for the gauge particle of the gravitational force, it's literally time. Just as the photon is the gauge particle for the electromagnetic force, and for the strong force there are other gauge particles operating in the minute distance of the nucleus of an atom, and these particles are transferring the force between the strong and the nuclear and the electromagnetic force. Well, time is the gauge particle for gravity. And the time is going boop, 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 boop. And time is literally a particle. And the universe is full of the particles of time. And the reason that the universe is expanding is because God's mind is expanding. God's constantly pouring into the field of the universe new expressions of their own self. And so time is pouring into every mathematical point in the universe, and as a result the universe must expand to make room for the unfolding constant revelation of God's presence.
Which universe expands?
Well, they're both expanding.
And which one do these physical bodies reside in?
We reside in the one that is apparent to our own eyes, but we can safely reason that one of these universes is metaphorically male and the other is metaphorically female. However, if we were female, we might be more content to say, well, I'm in a female universe and I'm heading towards a male universe. I'm heading to the other side. And if we are male, we might be attracted to the feminine concept of another universe. But needless to say, that's all just words.
Perspective, really.
Yeah.
But we,
Because once we are balanced within ourselves, between our own feminine and masculine nature, and once we are in harmony with the unfolding of the future, that it's not an enemy to us, the future is not an enemy, when we are in harmony with that, we are moving to the central pillar of the tree of life. When we lay the pillar of life down and we see that one half of it contains all of the wisdom of the East, everything that is hidden and subjective in the East is revealed and objective in the West. That's why it says that thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. So those things that are hidden in the East, in the subjective realm, are descending to us, and they are defining the unfolding reality of consciousness here in the West. So heaven is literally descending to us, just as the mysteries of the universe are descending to the mind of Western man. Everything is in the process of descending. God is descending. We are ascending. And therefore it's this meeting, this joining of that which is coming down to that which is
and is that the Hebrew symbol, Star of David?
Yes.
Representative of that?
That's the symbol that is found in the center of the mandala of the Tree of Life.
Is this other universe the one that is not apparent to our eyes?
It's not apparent to our eyes because we can only, as with the fourth dimension, can only perceive it with our mind. Our minds can travel there, but our bodies cannot.
Is this other dimension the mind of God and we are in the mind of man?
No, because the mind of man is
what
really...
What is this other dimension?
The mind of man is literally the product of the thoughts of God, because literally we and God are one. There is only one soul in the universe. And the Buddhists, when they, you see, there is almost absolutely no space between this universe and the other. And that's exactly what God is. God is nothing. God is emptiness. God is, according to the Kabbalists, zero. God is Ein Sof, undescribable, unmentionable, unmeasurable. There is no means by which we can describe the essential nature of God except by the absence of description itself. Zero, nothing. And so,
Amazing. It's just amazing. What a theory. It's just, it's so complete. So complete. I mean, just on every level, it's there isn't even a pause in what he's trying to think through, you know.
I'm trying to punch out some of the holes, though. I'm not trying to find holes. I'm trying to, where somebody might be able to criticize, I'm trying to get him to elaborate.
You want to stimulate different branches of reasoning on the whole, all of the logic behind it.
What's that?
just somebody going up the stairs. Which brings us to the essential nature of our own existence, which is in reality nothingness. We are all just extensions of this divine illusion, because when we break down the principles of our own existence, when we look at the molecular structure, we see that it's made from atoms. We see that the atoms are made from electrons and neutrons. We see that these things are made up of fields of energy, and that the fields of energy literally are made up of time and space. And in reality, what we are made up of is pure nothingness, pure energy. And it's just energy that has descended and compactified itself. It's like frozen energy. It's just an illusion. God has descended into the force field of matter and has taken energy and just kind of squeezed it together and made shapes and forms. But in reality, these shapes and forms are made up out of nothing but divine reality. And so God maintains the illusion of existence. And that illusion of existence, if we have faith that God is an eternal creature, of course, if God was all of a sudden to die, well, then the illusion would end. Everything would end. But if God is, and we assume at least for 20 billion years God has been sustaining the illusion, and we imagine that they can for many, many more billions of years to come. And that would be long enough. But it's sustaining this sublime illusion of reality. All the ancient teachers have known that this is Maya. This is pure illusion, and that nothing exists but the divine soul of the universe itself, who is the great master illusionist.
Well, as John was mentioning earlier, or you, as we delve deeper into the subatomic structure, it doesn't exist. It only exists for us. And of course, part of it, I believe part of the relativity theory is that sometimes, well, you cannot remove yourself from the experiment.
No.
You can never remove yourself far enough from the experiment if you're going to conduct the experiment. And if you conduct the experiment, you're always going to get some sort of answer.
Mm-hmm.
But yet you can't really put your finger on it because it doesn't exist. Something of this along those lines, I believe.
Well, exactly. That's Heisenberg's theorem, that the more you insert yourself into the nature of your experiment itself, you cannot see quantum reality in the way it actually behaves because you're interfering with it when you shine your electron beam on the atom. So you can either discover velocity or you can discover place, where it is, location. But you can't discover both at the same time because you're interfering with the structure of the thing you are studying. Well, it's the very same way. If we cannot descend into our own studies without interfering with them, God literally cannot descend into the field of their own created reality without interfering in the structure of this reality. And the sign of their interference is dimensions and forces. The force fields that we measure as the function of physical life itself is the sign of their interference. They cannot not interfere if they are going to, if they have, and which they did, transform themselves from pure thought to energy in order to create the illusion of reality. So what we measure, the dimensions of reality, the forces of existence, these are the very shadows of God's presence in the universe. They cannot hide themselves and didn't plan to. It just took all of these 20 million years for the human mind to become capable of comprehending in a comprehensive way the ideas that we are now assimilating.
Well, it's actually from the moment of the Big Bang.
Incomprehensible. We've reached a point of comprehending incomprehensible.
Yes, exactly.
You can't measure with a measuring stick what can't be measured.
Exactly.
Because the measuring stick is in 3 dimensions and you can't use it to measure it. So our entire laws, all of our laws of physics are inadequate to comprehend the mind of God, the building blocks of our own reality.
But they bring us to the point of actually knowing that.
They bring us to the doorway of being able to transcend our own reasoning and its paradox. And you have to accept the paradox, you know.
Total
like,
paradox.
yeah, you know, the world is moving, the gravitational light is moving in a great cycle. So to imagine, as some might, well, what happens if you come to the edge of the expanding universe and you're standing on the outer fringe of the universe? If you throw a stone, where will the stone bounce back? Some people ask. Well, of course, that's a question.
Euclidean.
What?
It's a Euclidean frame of mind.
Yeah, it's Euclidean thought.
You're
because
driving at the speed of light and you put on your headlights.
yeah, exactly. But it's all paradox and it's all enigma, and the questions do not present answers. And as soon as you're looking for answers, it means you're still stuck in this round of consciousness. You're still stuck in the Euclidean world. So in our world, stuck in this outer circle, this circle out there in the fringe of the universe, well, you find out that you never got to the edge of the universe because you're riding a light wave, and the light wave is just simply bending and making you think you're approaching the end when you're really coming back to the beginning, and there is no end to it.
But I've often thought in that format and been boggled by the concept of the expanding universe expanding into what?
Infinity.
Expanding into something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But then how can there be a boundary if it doesn't exist?
There you go. These are the questions
That's very
that
transcendent. That
boggle-
thought itself prompts a transcendent feeling.
Yes,
I find.
an oceanic
It's
experience.
oceanic, yeah.
Yes, because how can you define infinity in a mathematical way without boggling your own mind about it? I mean, just think, the opposite of going out into space is going deep into inner space.
Sure.
And start breaking down the equation. 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, 1/32. Finally, you have hit numbers. I mean, you are crunching numbers that are just too tight. You can't think about it. You can't think about it anymore. The numbers just simply fade away into nonsensical reality. It just boggles the imagination that infinity can continue.
Right, like they can pinpoint the moment of the Big Bang within like billionths of a second, but
Yeah.
they cannot
Yeah,
pinpoint the moment.
yeah, and
They
that's
it loses all meaning. When
and
you get
it's
to
the
that
same
point.
like pi. I mean, you have this great circle, and then you have the mathematics of the circle itself, and you have this number pi, this universal number that defines all of our concepts of circles and expanding reality. But the number, well, so far nobody has discovered the square for pi, right? It just keeps going, plunk, 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 plunk. Which is how the 10th dimension were found, because when they tried to apply the mathematics of quantum theory to Einstein's 4 dimensions, it got stuck in these repetitions. It got stuck in these 0.3, 0.3, 0.3, 0.3, 0.3, 0.3, 0.3, and there was no beginning.
But you can't find the end. It's like a limit in calculus. You can't find that end point, but it implies an end point. It implies a focal point. It's like the rabbit approaching the wall in my email.
Yeah.
It keeps halving the distance and halving the distance. How does it ever reach the wall? If every distance it travels, it continually halves and halves and halves. Well, that number can continue for infinity. But it implies a focal point. It implies that ultimate conclusion.
Well, it
But
implies...
mathematically, you can't reach it, though.
No, but what it implies is the point that you're running into raw electromagnetic force, that the light force that defines your reality. The only reason you and I can't walk through each other is because the negative force of the electrons that define the outer shell of your body repel and repulse the electrons of my body. But if we somehow could, certain molecular structures find covalence between each other, then literally we could pass through each other or become, sort of blend together and become an amorphous thing, and then
Isn't that
maybe
tantric
pass-
lovemaking?
Huh?
Tantric lovemaking?
Oh, sure.
Is that what's occurring?
Well, it is in a sense what you're experiencing in sexuality, in the tantric relationship between another, is you're exchanging fluids, and the exchange of fluids is literally the exchange of soul. You see, because the physical universe is made up of solids and gases, and so the gases represent the spiritual, intellectual aspects of the human life force. The solids represent the lower part of man, which is his body, his flesh, his skin and bones. Well, in between the gaseous realm and the solid realm is the fluid realm. in the very same way is that when the spiritual part of man comes together with the physical part of man, it produces the soul. And the soul is the merging and the union of these two realities. Well, in the physical realm, of which is a metaphor for the spiritual reality, when you have the gaseous realm and the physical realm come together, the solid realm, they have a realm that exists between them that contains the properties of both. So fluids, liquids, are like solids in that they are incompressible. So you have the whole field of hydraulics. So solids do not compress, but yet like gases, they will take the shape of any container that so they are fluid, like gases. So the liquid realm of life, the fluid realm, is like the soul of man. The soul is that word we use to define this existence where the higher spiritual are joined together with the physical. And so it's the soul which is the middle realm. Now some people are defined by their lower nature because that's the stronger. So we say that this soul is a physical thing. He's captured by the weight of the world. He's motivated by the ways of the flesh. Other souls have been captured by the higher consciousness, by the higher mind. So because the soul and the fluid realm are like each other in the metaphorical, metaphysical realm, when two people make love and exchange fluids, life fluids, body juices, they are literally two souls becoming one. Two souls are merging in one, and her fluids become mine, and my fluids become hers. And when these fluids merge together in the right combinations, they produce life.
Also, I think perhaps that the electromagnetic field around our body merges with the other. I mean, there comes a physical boundary that you can't pass through because of the nature of the negative electrons and the repelling concept. But the field of energy around our body, that system merges with the other system. I mean, it does when we bump into each other on the street.
Sure.
But it's more of an opening up, a conscious, allowing the fluid of the electromagnetic system outside of the physical body, which is still part of the physical body. Mm-hmm. Especially in like Ayurvedic medicine.
Yeah.
They synthesize with one another in the same process.
Well, of course, and the synthesis comes from allowing people into that field.
Right, you're allowing someone into that field. You're putting down your boundary and creating one boundary.
Yes, and that's why, that field that you're talking about has another boundary which is very psychological. There's that psychological boundary that's an extension of the literal electromagnetic field that operates around us. And so the psychological boundary even reaches out further than that. And so we guard that inner boundary by sight. We send out psychological signals.
Exactly.
We send out, and we have a space that we don't want other people. Unless you're riding the subway and things like that, you make space for it.
And you have to actually bring your boundary system in.
You do. But you see, you have rationalized it because you know this is not a direct threat to your psyche, because these people are just passing in the dark. They're not interested in you, so you're safe.
Right.
But it's when you enter into psychological circumstances in which you know someone is trying to penetrate.
That's what I was talking about before, about how people in New York feed off of each other. Because they're trying to penetrate other people's boundary energy systems. Yeah. And it's the psychological system that reaches out farther. That's why you're able to project your mind and your desires and sometimes even your thoughts, especially if you're empathic or the other person is, onto somebody else's psyche.
Yeah.
And that's what we feel, but we don't always have the ability to articulate it because the resources of that information may be beyond us.
Yeah.
We just haven't developed our sensitivities to that point.
Like locus. The concept of a grasshopper is a pretty benign insect, but if you put them together in captivity or in close proximity so that their wings brush against each other, they suddenly transform. They become locusts. They become ravenous. They start eating all of the plants in their environment because their wings are touching. And it's those energy fields, it's that crossover boundary that transforms grasshoppers into locusts. And essentially, they're the same insect.
Wow.
So there's the
And the-
group psycho, the
group-
mass.
The
Collective
and
consciousness.
The plague,
Collective
and the
consciousness.
plague. If you think about that, the plague, that's very metaphorical because
Yeah.
the plague sent down by God,
Yeah.
quote unquote, the locusts.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can derive something.
Well, in the book of Judith, it likens Nebuchadnezzar and the armies of Babylon, who have spread themselves across the earth westward, as the locusts of the earth. And you see them listed in the book of Revelation, these locusts. And this is literally the group psychology that you're talking about. When these individuals that would be very harmless as individuals, when they come together and are being moved by the group psyche, then they become ravenous and they become destructive and they become empires that
And they eat till they
devour.
die.
Yeah.
They eat until they die.
Whoa. And you know, wow, that's everything I was trying to say to you about New York earlier, is
Yeah.
that we fall victim to our own fears. That to stay alive, we need to eat or feed off of these other energy systems. But when you can be opened
Simple
up,
for neurosis.
Yeah.
I think
Neurotic
maybe
reaction.
sometimes, I'm not exactly sure, but I think perhaps, and this is why the universe is ever expanding, the source, and I know it's a cliche, is rather infinite. And, you know, if we can actually not just understand intellectually or even assimilate into our being, but if we can practice, perhaps even develop that understanding to a point where we recognize that that is really just again, the illusion, the game, the trick, the deception, that we can break from that feeding frenzy, and the energy source then becomes infinite because it's coming from the furnace. It's coming from inside instead of looking to get it someplace else outside.
And when you have that concept, you find it explicitly right there in the scripture where the Holy One comes and says that I am the bread of life, and whoever eats from this bread will never hunger again. And you have the mystics entering into the collective consciousness of brutish man, always constantly appearing and focusing our appetites and our thoughts of the flesh to inward thoughts of the higher person that lives within. So you have the Buddha, you have Christ, you have all of these saints coming into the conditions in which we're speaking about. We're defining the collective consciousness of man, and they're constantly intervening, reminding us of our lower nature, our brutish ways, and trying to bring us back into feeding the spirit from the higher source, rather than constantly just feeding the flesh from the lower source. And if we, as Paul talks about, meats for the belly and the belly for meats. So if you gorge yourself with too much meat and too much food for the flesh, then you just get weighed down and you become what you eat. And becoming what you eat, you just simply become a brutish, natural person with natural thoughts and natural inclinations, and you don't take time out to feed off the bread that comes from above, nor drink from the true vine, which brings, and the true well, which springs up the life everlasting. So that there again is all of these allusions to this higher transcendent presence of another realm, another dimension, another person who we literally are, and just simply have to wake up to that.
Now, why do some people have to work their entire lives and maybe gain this much, and others can fall into it almost without any effort? Why does that happen?
Into what?
Into this understanding.
Oh.
Into act. You know, you have men who spend their whole lives, men and women, as monks, let's say,
Yeah.
constantly meditating, looking inside, trying to find the internal, trying to raise their consciousness, trying to turn away from the temptations of the flesh and the sense desires and the vain indulgences.
Well, the illusion that comes immediately to mind is the set of illusions that exist between Abraham and Sarah, Rebecca and Isaac, and Jacob and his 4 wives. And we find out that in the scripture, all of a sudden, there is Abraham, but Sarah is there with him. Abraham and Sarah appear together in the text of the scripture. He didn't have to go looking for her. She did not have to go looking for him. They were there. And of course, Abraham and Sarah are a Hebrew allusion to Brahma and Sarasvati, who are both God. So Abraham becomes the father of the Hebrew people, just as Brahma is the father of the universe, the creator. Now you see that Abraham and Sarah have a son. The son is Isaac. Abraham instructs Isaac not to go abroad, afield, looking for a wife. God will bring one to you. So Isaac does not leave the place where he was born, but rather the servant of Abraham goes away and comes back with Rebecca. Rebecca symbolizes see, just as Sarah is divine wisdom herself, well, Rebecca symbolizes that form of wisdom that comes unsought for, and it comes voluntarily at God's behest to the soul that is being prepared for sacrifice. That person does not have to seek that wisdom. It literally comes to him or her, and it comes as a free gift from above. They didn't even look for it. They didn't seek it.
Well, they stored it up in another lifetime.
Yeah. But Jacob, poor Jacob, symbolizes that common lot of humanity that not only has to go out searching for wisdom, but it takes his whole lifetime to discover her. And he goes down and he labors in the fields of Laban, the Syrian. And poor Jacob goes down and he works for 7 years. And he's laboring for Rachel, because Rachel is the exquisite one. She is the sumptuous one. She is the beautiful one. Well, when finally Jacob works off his 7 years, it turns out that Laban decides instead that he can't have Rachel, he can only have Leah. And so Leah is the oldest daughter. Well, Jacob wants to marry Rachel because she's the one he's sexually and spiritually involved with in his own mind. But sure enough, he has to settle for Leah, and he has to work 7 more years for Rachel. And in the meantime, each of them give Jacob their handmaidens. So now you have the fact that Jacob has 4 wives. And out of these 4 wives come the 12 tribes of Israel. And the 12 tribes of Israel are still sojourning through the earth, seeking the meaning of divine wisdom. And that's what these 4 women represent. The wisdom that God has apportioned to all the 4 corners of human history. And so Jacob has to go into all of these 4 corners to seek out this divine wisdom. The reason he has to labor first for Leah, because Leah represents the lesser mystery, the prelude to the higher mystery, which is Rachel.
Where are the other 2 come in?
Well, the other 2 are the handmaidens. So there are lesser and higher mysteries out in the other nations of the world besides Israel. You see, Rachel and Leah they came from Syria. Syria represents Israel's own lower nature. That's why it says, "A Syrian ready to perish was my father. He went down into Egypt and he labored there. And it was there that God made of him a great nation." So Jacob has to go down to Syria among Laban to labor for this wisdom that only comes from a sojourn in the lower world. This is where wisdom is sought. This is the Zadok. Jacob was a Zadok. He went down. But he realized that the mysteries of Israel are not self-contained, but they have to do with the wisdom of the whole world. Israel is not an entity unto itself, but Israel is assimilating the wisdom of the entire world because God has spoken to all people, and there is wisdom in every direction of human experience. So Jacob now must have 4 of these women that represent the wisdom that comes from all 4 corners of the universe, of the world, of history. But Leah represents the lesser mystery which Jacob must attain first before he is even capable of understanding the higher mystery. Rachel, the higher mystery.
So is he realized?
Jacob?
Yeah.
Well, his name is changed to Israel when he attains to that state of realization. After he has sojourned, and now he's coming back to the place of his birth. He's returning to the source of his original commandment to go out into the world. Now he's returning. When he returns, he has to, of course, confront his brother Esau. And once he reconciles himself to his brother Esau, on the way, his name is changed to Israel. And now Jacob can become a minister to Esau. He can become a minister to the world in general, to the lower world. But this was not so with Isaac. Isaac's wisdom came to him, and he didn't have to labor for it. He didn't have to go to a lesser mystery and then to a higher. The higher mystery came directly to Isaac.
Why?
Well, because he was being prepared for another mission.
What was his mission?
His mission was to offer himself as a sacrifice upon the tree, upon the stone, upon the altar. And so Isaac is the universal symbol of the sacrifice of Christ. That's why Paul will later say in the book of Galatians, if you are Abraham's seed, if you are in Christ, then you are Abraham's seed. And Abraham's seed is Isaac. He has another son, Ishmael, but it's through Isaac that the inheritance comes. So if we are in Christ, which is a symbol of Isaac's sacrifice, then we are Abraham's seed. And so that's basically the wisdom that comes to mystics and those who are being prepared for some mission in the earth always comes by just instant revelation. They're not laboring like the average person.
But Jacob had a mission too.
Yeah, Jacob's mission was to go down and represent humanity itself. Jacob is humanity. Isaac is the higher state of consciousness, which is Christ consciousness. Jacob is humanity. This is why he brings forth 12 sons, because these 12 sons represent the whole of humanity itself.
Is that reverberated into the concept of 12 apostles?
Yes, exactly. The 12 tribes of Israel are
Were the
symbolic
writers of the Torah numerologists?
Sure, they were Kabbalists, and it's by number and weight that God created wisdom. And so
really the Kabbalah is almost like a key.
It is the key
to unlocking the code of what the Torah is.
Exactly. It is the key. Without the key, that's why even Jesus said to the Pharisees, he says, you throw away the keys of heaven. You neither go in, nor do you allow others to come in. So what he was admonishing them for is disdaining the teachings of the Kabbalah, disdaining the teachings of the mystics, which come by way of an understanding of the dimensions of the tree of life.
So the Torah is almost as if it's just a vessel like the parables are really just like pretty pictures on the outside of something that is a deeper
Yes.
realization, a deeper truth that the Kabbalah unlocks.
Yes.
On the surface, it's like a vessel with pictures on it, the story of Jesus, the story of Abraham.
Yes.
But really, there's a deeper interwoven thread through all of those stories that is unlocked by the Kabbalah.
That's exactly right, and that's why
It is?
that's exactly right, because that's why it says in the Zohar, the prelude to the Zohar, introduction to the Zohar, it says, "Woe to them that mistake the garments of the Torah for the Torah itself. Woe to them who mistake the outer meaning of the story, the outer stories, the outer vestments in which the Torah is framed, the stories, the letters, the commandments. Woe to them who think that this is the essence of the Torah. But the essence of the Torah is the meanings that are ensouled within the stories and the letters of the Torah."
The only two good points I made all night, we ran out of tape. Did you notice that?
No, we're not out of tape. The battery. I just plugged it in.
Oh, sorry.
We're good. We got plenty of tape.
Yeah, did you get the point where John was making about
I
the
got
Torah?
everything.
Yeah,
Everything.
good.
Oh, good.
So, yeah, no, you're exactly right. So when you read the precepts of the Torah, of the Kabbalah, you find that they accentuate the point that you just made, that no one should mistake the outer vestments of the Torah for the Torah itself, for the pictures and the...
Was there maybe a political reason why they needed to hide the meaning of the Torah
Sure.
behind these vestments?
Yes, they did, because the answer to that stems right back to the events in the Garden of Eden, where it says that Eve brought forth two sons, those who were in the spirit of Cain, those who were in the spirit of Abel.
Right.
And it says, in the process of time, Cain rose up and slew his brother Abel. Well, Cain represented, at that earliest time in history, the collective lower consciousness of Adamic man. Abel represented the emerging higher state of consciousness within that same theological and philosophical framework of the teachings of Adam. So now you see that Cain is coming to the forefront. Cain is assimilating. Cain is devouring. Cain is creating a world in his own image. He's marked because he has killed his brother Abel. So God sets a mark on Cain. Cain represents every single person who kills another person in the name of God. Where there is no law, Paul says, there is no transgression. If we have not received the Torah, if we have not received the law, those nations that do not call themselves Judeo-Christian, they are outside, they are not in transgression, they are obeying the perfect and divine will of God themselves. It's only those inside the circle of the Adamic religion who have received the Torah, who have received the instructions of the prophets, only they are held accountable by God, because we have been instructed. So, because the lower nature is constantly destroying the higher nature, the Judeo-Christian religion has always been one of prophetic substance. Always God has renewed an understanding through sending prophets into the world, seers, teachers, inspired ones. In every generation since the time of Adam, there has been a remnant of rishis and adepts and muruds and individuals who have access to the inner and higher meanings. They, knowing full well that the children of darkness steal everything they get their hands on, even the sacred word, they learned over the course of hundreds of years to couch the truth in terms of allegory and metaphor. So that when the children of darkness grabbed a hold of these sacred books, they would read them and stumble all over the meanings. That's why the Apostle Peter in the time of Christ will say, "Let them who speak as the oracles of God." And so we know by studying ancient history the role of the oracle. Whenever somebody went to inquire of the oracle, maybe they went on behest of a king. A king has sent them, or some political leader or a general. Go and ask the oracle if the times are auspicious, if it's a good move that I'm about to make. And the most classic example is when the king sent a messenger to the oracle to say that I'm getting ready to go across into Asia, and should I go? I'm going to make war against the kings of Persia. And the oracle sends him back a message saying, when you go over there, you will indeed destroy a mighty empire. Well, he reads it wrong. He rushes headlong over there and destroys his own empire. You see, because he didn't read the instructions right. It's the same thing with the Bible, the same thing with the Torah. If you don't read it correctly, you will stumble over the esoteric meaning. In order to read it correctly, you must be inspired by the divine spirit herself, by wisdom herself. And this is how she distinguishes her children from the children of darkness. Because when you finally come to the end of the age, all of the children of light, their mind will be predisposed towards the inner understanding of the sacred text. The children of darkness, their mind will be predisposed towards an outer application. That's why you see all the killing and murder that's going on in Palestine. These Zionists are reading the literal Torah, and they are reading it literally, and they are finding in it justification for killing their enemies because Moses commanded them to do it. But in reality, what Moses commanded the children of Israel, he says, when you go into the promised land, which is not land at all, the only land that a child of Israel is allowed to rule over by force is the land of his and her own body. And the promised land is the higher, exquisite, sublime state of mind that God promised to bequeath to God's children when they finally came to the end of their journey. And so Moses says, now when you go into the empire, into the land, I want you to kill every woman that you meet. I want you to kill every man. I want you to kill every child. And I want you to destroy all of the animals that you find. Well, if anybody obeys that literally, well, they make God out to be as mad as they are. However, then Moses takes the children of Israel aside. He says, now look, this is what I commanded you. It's what God commanded you. But this is what is meant. When you go into the empire of your own soul, I want you to confront every man that dwells within there. And by that I mean, I want you to confront every propensity that you have within yourself to sow the seed of error into another person. That's the man. Destroy it. Kill it. Kill every impulse you have for sowing impurity or error or ignorance into the heart of another person. And then I want you to go in and confront every woman within yourself. And the woman within ourselves is that propensity that we, every one of us, have within ourselves to open ourselves up to receive false teachings and error and impure thoughts into ourselves. You know, so we are receptive to that which is wrongly implanted in our souls.
Like capitalism.
Yes, exactly. And therefore kill that, destroy it, and then kill every child, which means every new thought or every new way of life or every new fascination that is born of this errant sowing and receiving of error and lies and untruth. Every little child, which means every little new thought, every little new inspiration that you receive, such as, oh wow, now I can go to business school, I can get a BA degree, I can get a master's in arts, and I can go to work at I can become the head of a corporation. Well, that starts out as a child and then becomes a full-blown individual that dwells within. Well, kill it as a child. That's what Moses is saying. So anyway, that's the allegory of this higher warfare that we were commanded. And then Moses passes this down to the world in a literal form. It's only those who are studying the scripture in their fourth dimension, non-Euclidean, higher dimensional way can penetrate the meaning of those scriptures. And that's what separates the children of light from the children of darkness in our very own time. Those who can see into the fourth dimension can see God rising in the sum of all reality in our time. And you see it with the mind. And when the mind, you were talking earlier about you've given up this for a little while and now you're dwelling at the heart. You're thinking in terms of the emotional response that you have to them, and you're following that. Well, that is essential, because if the heart and the mind are not connected, if we're just operating at this level, that's why Paul says, if I know all mysteries, if I can speak with the tongue of men and angels, and I can remove mountains, if I have not this, if I have not love, then I'm nothing. I'm just a chiming cymbal and a clanging bell. But of course, there are a lot of people who have just pure emotional content, and their hearts are not connected to their minds, and therefore they become very vulnerable, and they're not discerning the difference between good and evil. So the central pillar of the tree of life, which runs directly through the psyche, along the spinal cortex of every individual, connecting all the senses to the visceral, emotional, inner workings of the human person, and then all those things connected to the mind create for wholeness, for true love, right aversions, right attachments, but also for true discernment, higher insight. And so basically that's all quantum theory is all about. It's just attaining to insight and attaining to the central pillar, which is the source of all reality, and it's returning to God. In the Hebrew scriptures it says that God's name is Yod-Heh Vah-Heh. With these letters, the universe was created. Yod-Heh Vah-Heh equal to the number 26. The four Sephiroth on the tree of life equal the number 26. So the name of God is revealed on the central pillar of the tree of life. When you take the Hebrew word love and the Hebrew word for unity, each equal the number 13. And so when you put the 13 and the 13 together, you have the whole meaning of the scriptures, love and unity. Love fulfills the scripture. Unity brings us back to the source of love.
That's what I guess what I meant when I asked you about the numerology part of it. I had heard that the numerical value of the tree of life is
55.
55?
All 10 separate together.
Right, but if you take the symbols in the Hebrew text and add them up, I think it's 244.
Oh.
Actually, the Garden of Eden is 244.
Okay, you're talking about the word
The
tree
word,
of life.
right.
Yes, okay.
Is 244, and well, Garden of Eden is 244, and the tree of knowledge is 133. And if you divide one by the other, you get theta, which is the golden spiral, which once again is that focal point, which was considered a holy number by Pythagoras.
Sure.
Pythagoras thought the golden spiral was a special number, a religious number, a mystical number, and it's that
The number by
hypothetical focal point that you can never reach, because the number reaches into infinity. It's 1.6.
It's like a pi thing.
Yes.
Okay.
But if you plot it, it's a perfect, and we see the spiral everywhere in nature. We see it,
Spiral.
we see it everywhere. We see it in galaxies. We see it in
Wow.
DNA. We
If
see
you
it
divide
everywhere.
the tree of life into the Garden of Eden, you get the spiral.
Yes, which is a very unique number. Mathematically, the odds of coming up with that number, which begs the question: were the people who wrote the Torah essentially numerologists?
They were
Astrology.
adepts in the highest of all the sciences. They were adepts in the mathematics of the universe. They were adepts in the study of plants, the essential nature of all living things, and the illusions to numerical qualities of things is in the Torah, as well as in the relationship between living creatures and the human soul. And that's why the 5 kinds of sacrifices that are acceptable on the altar, every one of them is nonviolent. Every one of them are, none of them
What
are
is
meat
it?
eaters. Hi. And so you have lambs and cattle and goats and doves and sheep. All of these are the only acceptable sacrifices. Each of them have numerical qualities to their names, but each of them also have hieroglyphic qualities about themselves, basically, which is the essential nature of their own existence. So when you take all of these sciences and begin to just make one big picture out of them, sure enough, you see the whole.
John needs to meet Bob.
Oh, yeah.
Bob is his friend in West Virginia who, tell him what he's doing.
Well, Bob is...
I'm shutting this off, actually. I'm changing the tapes.
Yeah. Anybody want a cup of tea before you sleep?
No, I'm too hot.
Can we do another tape?